What comes to mind when you think about Scotland? Misty hills, craggy rocks, kilts, flowing red beards, bagpipes, huge swords. Freedom! I know, right? It's hard not to. Yeah, it seems like it's somewhat touristy, to be frank. There would be those that would say, no, this really is our identity, kind of. But here's the thing. All of these are indeed part of the Scottish national identity. To what degree is debatable. What is not is that there are ideas that have stuck, and they probably won't be unstuck for quite some time. But how did these ideas come about? This imagined community? Well, stories, of course. In 1790, a writer, literary collector, and politician, James Macpherson, he published a cycle of epic poems called the Ossian Cycle, or Ossian. They were tales of death, love, joy, all of the good stuff, basically. Now, according to James, he collected these stories from word of mouth of the Gaelic people of Scotland, true Gaelic residents of Scotland. He said that the tales had ancient origins. Is this all starting to sound familiar? Now, since these poems were published, there's been endless debates as to whether or not they're true. Currently, they say that they have true elements, but a lot of the details of the stories are indeed made up. They were hugely popular and incredibly influential, and they somehow embedded permanently into Scottish identity, especially to one individual who pretty much shaped all of this identity. Now, he was an antiquarian, and the idea of antiques definitely is an important one. The idea of something already being imbued with a story and that you can take them and continue the story itself. So keep this in mind for sure. But this antiquarian, his name was Sir Walter Scott. He produced a ton of ballads and novels about Scotland. In the 1820s, he staged King George IV's painting with him wearing a Scottish tartan. Boom, this stuck, and it became a piece of Scottish national identity. We have to also remember in the 1820s there was a massive romantic movement, and this idea of the Scottish tartan and whatnot, it was romantic. It certainly had currency. Now, much of this was not in the hands of the Scottish themselves. It had been decided for them. So why do I bring this all up in an occult podcast? Well, let's just call it an act of comparison. If you remember the Magical Tools episode, I think that comparison is one of those tools that we as magicians need to have. You see, aggrandizing certain elements of Scottish identity does much, but one effect is that it obscures other elements. We can miss the true beauty of Scottish culture and history in some way. An incredible and fascinating history, and let's not beat around the bush, a badass history. What James Macpherson and Sir Walter Scott did to Scottish identity, Agrippa and the Golden Dawn did to magic. Again, while having elements of truth, going for the romantic or high notions of what Benedict Anderson called the imagined community, certainly obscures more than it enlightens. The real beauty, the real history, is in the background, waiting to be discovered. Just like Scotland, magic's history is pretty badass as well. How did this happen? I'm Douglas Batchelor. You're listening to What Magic Is This? And this is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Part 2. Now, although the story of the Golden Dawn as a society was over, in truth, its story was just beginning. Enter Israel Regardie. He was a secretary of Aleister Crowley in 1934. The two of them had a falling out because, well, Crowley. The same year, in 1934, he joined the Stella Matutina. As I mentioned last episode, this was a splinter group from Alpha et Omega, the group that Mathers started after the breakup of the Golden Dawn. Eventually, Israel Regardie left the Stella Matutina as well after a few years. In 1937 to 1940, Israel published Rituals of the Golden Dawn and their cosmology. There was a bit of a huge uproar at the time. Some were saying that he broke oaths, the oath of secrecy, which all those that are involved in this kind of magic seem to have to swear. But he felt that they should be revealed, as he was worried about them being lost to time. And who knows, it might have happened. I don't think it would have, but yes, he definitely did that thing. Now, this book, and you can buy it as one book nowadays, is the most important release of occult material in the 20th century, in my opinion, without a doubt. It has been revised and reissued tons and tons and tons of times. Everything was on the table now. The secret spice of secrecy was out, adding to the mystique. So what exactly did the Golden Dawn believe as a society? Now, most books jump right to the four elements. That would be Empedocles' four elements, things like air, water, fire, and earth. You have Kabbalah and all of that. But how did they see themselves in the universe and within magic? As far as I can tell, there's about four things. And this is taken from Stephen Skinner. One, that the universe of the physical scientist or occultist is only part and by no means the most important part of total reality. Two, that human willpower is a real force capable of being trained and concentrated, and that the disciplined will is capable of changing its environment and producing supernormal effects. Three, that this willpower must be directed by the imagination. And four, finally, the universe is not a mixture of chance factors and influences, but an ordered system of correspondences, and that the understanding of the pattern of correspondences enables the occultist to use them for his own purposes, good or ill. And, of course, that there is one God, as mentioned in the last episode. Particularly, it should be a Christian God, just to let you know. So let's break this apart. One, microcosm and macrocosm. So in a way, this is definitely pure alchemy, and to a degree hermetic, although probably not. Two, will. Okay, let's talk about will for a little bit. That each and every one of us has one will, one purpose. We are put here for a purpose, and our goal in life is to achieve this one purpose by any means necessary, according to some. Three, you can focus the will like a laser beam with your imagination. That being said, their metaphysics of imagination are woefully unexamined in the Golden Dawn. Four, correspondences. Everything is connected in some way. Learning these is in every magician's good interest. The more of these you have, the better a magician you are. Like Mario collecting coins until you get the one-up. Bling! F5, yes, it is stratified. There is a god all the way at the very top, like a monad, and that he, she, it has plans for you, and that's what you need to figure out with magic, of course. I'm probably leaving a lot out, but it's vast, their cosmology and their metaphysics. Let's talk about their grade structure a little bit. So as I said, they started out with one order, and then eventually Mathers had to add more as the people were not satisfied with having just the one, so they created a couple more. There's one called the Outer Order, otherwise known as the Golden Dawn. Within this, you have Neophyte, Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, Philosophus, and then there was the Inner Order, also known as the Order of the Ruby Rose and Golden Cross. You have the Portal, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus, and the Ethereal Link, and then the Third Order, which is Magister Templii, and Magus, and Epismus. So, also stated last episode, a lot of this comes from Masonry. We have to, for a second, talk about initiation. Now, initiation is an important thing. Freemasonry was a initiation machine in some way. Keep people initiated, keep giving them degrees. These orders that the Golden Dawn also had is like keep giving them initiations, keep them going, right? Mathers had to continue creating orders, as I said. There were more grades planned before the Golden Dawn ruptured, basically. There would be examinations before you could advance to the next order, or the next level, if you will. Now, I also have to remind you that practical magic was not taught in the Golden Dawn. So remember that meddling with the Goetia that Alan Bennett confronted Aleister Crowley about? Yeah, so there was that. This was for study, right? The use of the imagination through contemplation and visualization. So it seemed fairly benign. You can understand why the students wanted more, and why Mathers, feeling somewhat exhausted, wanted to hoard a lot of this knowledge to himself, because he wanted to keep himself up at the top. Yes, this grade structure is basically Freemasonry. You can see in the why Arthur Machen said what he said. Just going to put it that way. Now, I'm just going to say this as a quick aside. They would call each other, male members would call each other Frater, as in brother, and female members, they would be Soror, or sisters. And this is not a judgment on anybody particularly, but this is also something I have to deal with. So this is me addressing my problem. But if you call yourself Frater or Soror, and this is going to sound horrible, and I apologize from the outset, I kind of tailor my discourse with you as if you are somebody who wears a baseball cap indoors, and I know you're not bald. I'll just put it that way. I will be reserved in what words I use, and they'll tend to be monosyllabic. And yes, terrible thing. I know that I will have to deal with this. But yes, this Frater Soror stuff, I don't know if it's necessary anymore, guys. And if you're doing it just to have a nickname, cool, I get it. But just realize that it's something I'm going to have to work on. But yeah, the Frater stuff, you might as well be wearing a baseball cap to me. That's all I'm going to say about that. Kabbalah. Now, Kabbalah seems to be the spiritual Uber system around the world of Golden Dawn magic. There are other elements, definitely, but this was the main one. And the best way to think about Kabbalah for the Golden Dawn is that it is the canvas and the frame, not the individual paints that would color the Golden Dawn's magic, which would be things like geomancy, tarot, alchemy, symbolism, astrology, kamias, tatwas, astral travel, I Ching, the elements, and way more. But lots of this is from Agrippa, again, his Kabbalah, which would eventually become known as Hermetic Kabbalah. What Kabbalah is, and there will be an episode on Kabbalah. I didn't write any of this down, so I'm just going to wing it and see if I am right. If not, don't write me, because I really don't care. But what Kabbalah is for the Golden Dawn is that everything is connected. There are 4 planes: Atziluth, which is the divine world or divine plane. There's Bria, which is the creative plane. There's Yetzirah, which is I don't know, I might get a slap on the wrist, but it's the astral plane. And then there's Asya, which is the material plane. That's where we all are right here, right now. Everything manifest comes from emanations of Godhead, so very Neoplatonic. There are 3 of these. There's Ein, or Ein, which is nothing. There's Ein Sof, which is infinite. And then there's Ein Sof Or, which means limitless light. There's 10 emanations, basically. And these are the Sephirot, or the Sephiroth, whatever you want to call it, which are emanations of divine energy. Connecting the Sephirot or Sephiroth, there are 22 paths. Contemplation or astral interaction with these Sephiroth along the path is a magician's work. I believe starting at the very top, you've got Keter, then you've got Hokmah, Bina, Doth, maybe. I'm not too sure about that one. Going to Chesed, to Gebura, Tippereth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and finally Malkuth, which is where we are now, apparently. So yeah, that's it, I think. Anyways, everything maps to this tree of life. There are 32 points in total, so there's 10 Sephiroth and 22 paths. Just so you all know, this is episode 32 of What Magic Is This? Anyways, the Golden Dawn did what the Golden Dawn do. They would put Greek or Egyptian deities on the Tree of Life. They would add the John Dee and what would be called Enochian magic, although John Dee at no point ever called it Enochian magic. And then they would base their order structure around these. Things like elements, astrology, and the I Ching, and colors were all mapped onto the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which I think they got from Athanasius Kircher. I might be pronouncing that incorrect, but there it is anyway. But again, this was the frame and the canvas around all of this kind of magic. And Liber 777 is all of this. Like all of it. But also, please remember, most of this was Mathers' doing. So if you want to learn more about this kind of Kabbalah, don't bother with Liber 777 by Crowley. Pick up, Dion Fortune's The Mystical Kabbalah. It's much better, and it's actually readable. So there you go. But that's their stuff. That's what they believed in. The order structure, their beliefs, and the Kabbalah. There you go. And what were the consequences? Now, we have to go back to Stephen Skinner for a little bit. He says that there was and is a spectrum of how mankind has attempted to interact with the unseen, to the gods and other spiritual creatures. And there's three of them. There is religion, which is somewhat group-oriented. It's pretty open. It's done in public a lot of the time. Then there is the mystery tradition, which is small groups, small groups that are usually closed. It's usually for people that want to go a little bit further than just what religion offers. Like, hey, we noticed that you might like this one deity. Do you want to know more about this one deity? Do you want to interact with this one deity, maybe? So you get mystery cults and such things. And then third and finally, there is magic, which is personal, and it is for reasons of attaining things, etc., etc. Real world consequences and real world interaction. Now, it's not so cut and paste as Stephen Skinner has made it out as. I do tend to think that, people like Jake Stratton-Canty says, they tended to blend quite a bit. So, yes, but just take this as for what it's worth. There was overlap. But yes, this spectrum does seem to be somewhat correct. But that middle one I talked about, that is what I want to focus on. Now, they were called the teletai by the Greeks, and the teletai basically means completion or perfection, or initiation. Now, what happened is that Judeo-Christian traditions and monotheism in general squished the initiatory mystery tradition. Now, this is something that is very appealing, and dare I say it, for a lot of us, being social creatures, incredibly human, to feel part of something bigger, access to something the majority does not have access to. Which is why trade guilds like the stonemasons eventually became initiatory groups. Masons were more along the lines of combining religion and mystery traditions. Again, mostly Christian. You pretty much had to be a Christian to join Freemasonry from the get-go. It was still a far cry from the mystery cults from ages past. The Golden Dawn, they did something very different. They smushed the mystery tradition with the magical tradition, and this had not been done before. Now, what you get are these two things, the mystery tradition and magic, being linked. Before the Golden Dawn, you didn't have order for magic. It was personal. Now, it wasn't. And our recovery from this has been very slow. Look, I get it. Initiation is important, but magical initiation should be personal, I think. I've had quite a few people reaching out, and I'm not singling anybody, one person out here in any way. Trust me, I do get a lot of emails, but they say, how do I get started? How do I get initiated? What do I have to do to initiate? And it's just what have you done already? Chances are you already were initiated. I don't know. Did you see a ghost or something? Did you do a ton of mushrooms and sit on a beach? That's initiation. I never really was initiated in magic in any way, shape, or form. I don't know what to tell you about initiation. I'll just leave that there. But what I think this also does is that it puts up a lot of roadblocks. A lot of people think that they have to have some kind of initiation before doing practical magic. I'm telling you right now, you don't. And if you had something crazy happen, some kind of two-way mirror experience that I talked about in my episode, that's your initiation. You did it. Well done. Yay! Go forth. The Golden Dawn didn't set the rules. You do. However, if you feel that you have not been initiated yet, find a way. Do something. Make it big. Make it joyous. Anything. Now, another thing we have to talk about, and it is included in their name, Hermeticism. Okay. Oh boy. So Hermeticism is now used on everything, and I think it's mostly used for things that are not practical magic, but esoteric concepts. If you're not doing spell work and you are going into some kind of hidden knowledge from the past, I think that gets involved in being called hermetic or hermeticism. Hermeticism is not a philosophy, and it is not a religion, and I'm having a lot of trouble with defining what hermeticism is, or hermetism sometimes. It might just be another word for occult philosophy, which are two words that I hate having together as much as I hate the words occult science being put together. If it's not practical magic, it must be hermetic because it's from the past. And I don't know if it can be this strange catch-all blanket term. I'm just not sure what hermeticism is and is not anymore, and I'm having trouble. That's all I'm trying to say. Certainly a way of operating within the world is hermetic. It's not just something you sign up and say that you are. Basically, it revolves around the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. And if this sounds like I'm being far too literal, I very well might be, because a lot of things that they say they're hermetic, there's nothing of what they're saying within things like the Corpus Hermeticum or Asclepius or the Stobaeus fragments. Like, there's just not, these are things that we know are hermetic. And even in the name, Hermes itself is a god of travelers. He is not the god of destination, so just keep that in mind. So what I would say, if you want to really get to base as to what Hermeticism is, or the way of Hermes Trismegistus, please read the Corpus Hermeticum, read Asclepius, read the Stobaeus fragments. The Emerald Tablet is a somewhat later edition, and I'm not too sure if it fits. I'll just say that. But it has this idea, though, and the Golden Dawn were definitely guilty of this, of exalting something by just saying it's hermetic. I just gotta say, I don't think that that makes it right, popping hermeticism on anything. I have never called myself a hermeticist because I don't really know what it means. It's a very slippery term. Let's switch gears and talk about will. Okay. What to remember about the 19th century, particularly the end of the 19th century? We have a lot of Darwinism coming through. We have a lot of technological progress. Everything's becoming mechanical. Electricity's coming in. The spectrum, electric spectrum is being mapped out. It's tons of spectrums all over the place. The idea of higher purpose seems to come out of this, particularly through Darwinism. As mentioned last episode, a whole ton of Neoplatonic texts were being promulgated, as well as other areas of Greek wisdom. So we got to talk a wee bit about teleology. So teleology is basically that there is a purpose to all things. I might get a slap on the wrist for this comparison, but think of a metal's purpose is to become a tool. You break the metal out from rock, you melt it down, you make a tool, and then that tool gets used to break more rock, which gets more metal, etc., etc. It's just one huge cycle. Or I think one is that the reason that a rock drops to the ground when you drop it is that it wants to get to the center of the earth, right? Or that an acorn wants to become a tree, which then grows more acorns, which falls to the earth, which creates more this kind of thing. So that there's a purpose to everything. And it is a lovely notion that there exists for a reason for all of us to be here. The word will gets used a lot, and I am very wary of using it, specifically because of the idea of one. That there is one thing, we are here for one purpose, that we have one angel. that we are bestowed by the universe or the monad to find this one thing. I'm just going to say, folks, you are going to come away disappointed if you try to find this one thing, and perhaps a little bit stunted. There's also a chance of taking advantage of others and washing your hands of all your deleterious actions. Will is a very loaded word. I say time to get rid of it. The world has changed very much since the 19th century, and certainly has changed a lot since Crowley died, who was all about the will. And yeah, I get it. We like to have goals. Take the ethical route the Greeks did. Ethics is a teleology to the Greeks, a goal-oriented behavior. The goal of life to the ancient Greeks was eudaimonia, which meant flourishing. That's your goal. Do the good you know in as many ways as you can. Get away from the whole one thing. Think of it as having agency, not purpose. So let's talk a little bit more about Kabbalah and Kabbalah within magic, specifically Hermetic Kabbalah. The Golden Dawn, as I said, they definitely took it from Agrippa. Kabbalah is entirely overemphasized in magic, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion. I don't hate it, it's not useful to me practically as a model. One thing that Aleister Crowley did say that was entirely correct was when he was living in Paris, I believe, somebody called the cops on him because apparently he was doing bad things, as he probably was, but anyways. The police came in and they had a look around his apartment. They noticed some strange vials and glasses, and they thought he was doing some drug making or some other crazy stuff, and it turned out to just be what he would use to make coffee in the morning. Anyways, doesn't matter. They also pointed to, I think, some diagrams of the Tree of Life and of the Hebrew alphabet, and the police officer who was investigating, and Crowley apparently was being very, very nice to this man, being very understanding. He's like, I get it. You're doing your job. What can I do? But the police officer pointed. He's like, what the hell is this? And he says, oh, that's Kabbalah. And the police officer goes, well, what's that? And Crowley responds, it would take you about 30 years of constant practice and contemplation to be able to answer that question. And in this, Crowley is bang on. If you're doing Kabbalah, it's kind of what you have to do for the rest of your life, almost, in a way. People might disagree, but it is an incredibly vast mysticism. So yes, Crowley was bang on there. But Hermetic Kabbalah is very different than Jewish Kabbalah. Now, Hermetic Kabbalah, in a way, came from Christian Kabbalah, and there's some things that we have to unpack with this. Again, it was an adoption, and a very uneasy one at that. Things like Agrippa, or more specifically Pico della Mirandola, these guys were never about showcasing how awesome Jewish mysticism was and is. It was about taking their mysticism and stuffing it into Christianity to show how great Christianity was. That the Kabbalah applies more to the Christian world than the Jewish one. They were basically saying to the Jews, hey, look, you don't even understand your own mysticism because it applies to ours way better. This is fucking egregious. But they said that with Kabbalah, they could show how Christianity actually was the one true faith. They used Kabbalah to prop up Christianity. In other words, much like we do and have done for a long time in the West, things like Tibetan singing bowls to dream catchers, we took the what and we chucked away the how. We chucked away the why. We took it without even thinking twice, like we have always done. And I think it's time to stop, even if it is a useful model to use. You, in some way, are complicit in this taking of a beautiful mysticism. And here's the fucked up part. Christian Kabbalists, they would use this to ostracize and persecute the Jews further. And that is something I don't want to have any part of. If you want to do Kabbalah, Do Kabbalah. Get in there. Grab all 7 volumes of Daniel Matt's Zohar. Get down with Isaiah Luria. It's pretty awesome stuff. But for me, it's not entirely practical. It can certainly inform your world, but if you wish to decolonize this ugly aspect of magic, then do so. If you want to see how much Jews have contributed to the economy of secrets, then you need to buy a book. Get a book called The Age of Secrecy, Jews, Christians, and the Economy of Secrets, 1400 to 1800, by Daniel Jute. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it is a fascinating work. Just a small slice. You get to see just how much Jews and their experience advanced history and learning. And in that, it allows you to learn yourself. And that is a great thing. Worth more than 100 Tree of Life visualizations. Hermetic Kabbalah, I think it needs to go away. It really does. As useful as it might be to some people. Now, one of the greatest contributions to magic at large from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn would be the tarot, and specifically making the tarot magical. Beforehand, it was used as a game and some small ways for fortune telling, but now, Golden Dawn, boom, we got magical tarot. Now, the Golden Dawn, they would put all of the trumps that are the cards that we all know and love from the tarot, things like Death, Judgment, the Magician, the Fool, these things, they would be on the Tree of Life as the 22 paths. There were 22 of these cards, well, 21 plus a 0, which is the Fool. These would be the paths in between the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. So this made it very functional for the Golden Dawn. But this came from a couple of people, about 3 of them. This came from the Comte de Melay and the Court de Gabelon, but finally it really came from Eliphas Levi. Now, how did this happen? Well, it's very simple. It's incredibly simple. The numbers are the same. The Hebrew alphabet, there's 22 letters, and there's 22 trumps. That's it. That's the end of it. Look at that. Look how easy that was. And that they can somehow map to the Hebrew alphabet. And what's even crazier is that the Hebrew alphabet, the letters themselves are also numbers. So this was very, very appealing, specifically to Eliphas Levi, but especially so to Westcott and to Mathers. Now, I'm not against tarot. I just think it's a bit overemphasized, especially in conjunction with Kabbalah. There will be a tarot episode. In the meantime, you have my episode on cartomancy. Don't get me wrong, guys. I love the tarot. I really, really do. Just these fixed meanings, they don't do anybody any favors. They're so fixed that there's very little room. We love certainty, I get it. And with the Waite-Smith deck, specifically with the things that Waite said that this card definitely means, this card definitely means this card definitely means that. It's a bit much. There was also what is called the blind. I talked about it briefly in the Magical Tools episode, where wands was equated with fire instead of air. Mathers and Westcott, they had a bit of an argument about this, because to Mathers, who had gone through a whole bunch of the older books, more so than anything that Westcott had, he was like, look, they seem to equate wands with air. And Westcott is like, it fits better if we put it as fire. And also wands are fire. It's the creative energy, and so we have to go with that. It just fit better. Again, argument about the attribution, and guess what? Westcott won, even if it wasn't the original attribution. I know this shouldn't really matter, and to me it definitely doesn't, but just be aware that this kind of stuff did happen with the Golden Dawn. Anyways, it doesn't really, again, as I said, it doesn't really matter. I find elements and that stuff quite annoying. Which brings me to Neoplatonism and correspondences. As mentioned in the Neoplatonism episode, everything is an emanation of the one, or the monad. In this case, the framework that the Golden Dawn went with was one of Kabbalah. So everything had to be charted and set in place as the universe decrees. In the Libra 777 episode, I didn't want to get into it too much, but correspondences are tired and they're misused constantly. They're of a Greek inheritance of the idea of sympathia. The universe is one being, its parts separated by space, but through possession of one nature are drawn rapidly together. As everything has its neat little bin in the Golden Dawn, Libra 777 world, much gets lost and misused. And it's also not the way that magic works, as useful as it might seem. You start to get very dumb one-to-one matches between different magical systems and cosmologies. Stop this. Enough. Sam Block has said that finding correspondences or parallels is often highly informative and good for meditation and contemplation, but like numerology, taking it at a superficial level is lying to yourself. Correspondences mean A is like B, not A is B, which is a trap many people fall into. Please see the difference in things. Running wild with traditions puts you back in the taking the what, not the how or the why. It's sad and conveniently ignores the fact that many traditions establish their foundations outside of a Greek Neoplatonic worldview. And, might I add, many times fucking better. In the meantime, stay away from this trap. Read some Empedocles and Parmenides. Better yet, read Jake Stratton Kent's Geosophia. It's time to get away from this. That's it. Spiritualism. There is a real resistance for occultists to investigate a truly fascinating segment of history. We now have things like ghost hunting TV shows, which definitely don't help at all in any way, but don't dismiss a line of Western spirit relationship that we have had for over 30,000 years. This is incredibly important. There are ways of getting this right. The Golden Dawn was certainly a member of the wrecking crew to dismantle spiritualism, but they certainly weren't as big as the so-called spiritualists themselves. The Golden Dawn viewed these guys as competition, as did the Theosophists. But imagine if they had opened their doors to spiritualism. Magic would look very different today. Would it be better? Who knows? But I'd certainly say, if you have not looked into spiritualism and the work of the Society for Psychical Research, you owe it to yourself to do so. It is incredibly fascinating and hugely informative. And finally, on the list of consequences, we have high magic. Now, having a system where everything, huge quotation mark, fits does not make your magic more austere or higher, nor does doing so make it seem scientific. People have to get this in their heads. A lot of this magic was square peg, round hole with a sledgehammer kind of thing. What's more, now that we have some distance on the Golden Dawn, the history and the story of magic appears very different. There'll be a bit more on this later. But what did the Golden Dawn get right? How have they helped? For my money, the biggest thing that they contributed to the world of magic was furthering the technique of journeying. Now, journeying is a term that is applied to a lot of things. I will do an episode on it, but it was a huge part of their practice. Astral travel, that kind of thing. To quote Stephen Skinner, once again, and lastly, those magicians who use the Golden Dawn's Kabbalistic system habitually talk about the etheric body, thought of as almost physical in nature, a quasi-magnetic network of lines of force laying down the pattern to be followed by the physical body of the astral body, which is believed can be dissociated from the physical body and used by the magician to journey through the astral world, of the mental body, of the spiritual body, and of the Yechida, or divine spark, the highest aspect of consciousness, the fraction of Godhead which is held to be the central core of each human personality. While this is not the most appealing cosmology to me, the Golden Dawn's insistence on working this was awesome. This was a beautiful thing. Not the point of magic, or its greatest technique, but an extremely important one. Astral temples or inner temples, and getting this right is very important. Their flying roles are certainly something to look into, and they make for extremely interesting reading. While their idea of imagination is woefully incomplete, especially as it applies to willpower, an activity where one journeys on a symbol set like the tarot or the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life is highly recommended. Have fun with this. There are so many places one can go. The Golden Dawn did not invent this, but they certainly added much to it, which is commendable to say the least. I will link to an article in the show notes about the novelty of Golden Dawn style magic, and it puts a lot of perspective on this aspect of their activities within the Golden Dawn. It's really quite wonderful. But no, they did not invent it. It goes back way earlier. The Golden Dawn also kept the continuum of magic alive. It is no small wonder how they accomplished this at a time, like Victorian England, when rationality and objectivism was at its peak. They certainly should be applauded for this without reservation. Even if it was short-lived, the people it attracted all seemingly added something to the world, if not to magic. But again, keep in mind, they did not perfect magic on any level, right? Right. The Golden Dawn certainly tried to get Egypt right. Up until they were around, Egypt was this crazy, mysterious place where all magic comes from. End of story. The Golden Dawn wanted to know more about ancient Egypt, their practices, their rituals, and their functions. They weren't satisfied with Egypt is mysterious. They really wanted to get in there. They knew how central Egypt was to the story of magic, and it mattered to them. Egyptian mythology and history has moved on a ton since they were around, but they really tried their hardest, damn it. So don't take their Egyptian deities' place on the tree of life for gospel. Take their impulse, take their curiosity, which leads me finally to curiosity. This is the best thing about them. They were not content to just let things be. They would rush to the British Museum to try and explore aspects of the past that were magical. If there's one thing to take from the Golden Dawn, this is it. This is the golden nugget from the Golden Dawn. Their curiosity is indeed noble and admirable, that there is always more to know. This seeking. No wonder it dissolved so quickly and didn't last long. There was not enough knowledge that Mathers could cook up to keep them tethered to the Golden Dawn. They wanted more, and so should you. So, what do we make of all of this? Well, frankly, we get a museum piece, I think. A fascinating, if not romantic one. This kind of magic was supposed to fade away, I think, but somehow it has not. The fact that there is a system and a ranking and initiation is still very appealing to people. But things like Donald Michael Craig's Modern Magic is still recommended, which baffles me. I know a lot of people will say that, well, that's the book that got me started. I get that, but there has been so many books released since that book that are way better at starting in practical magic, in my opinion. The Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram is not the first spell you need to know, etc. Elemental weapons, this stuff, to me, it's counterproductive if you want to start doing magic. There's way better places. There's also a lot of fantasy going along with this kind of magic. In a way, Agrippa is to blame, with thoughts of a true, linear, noble magic kept secret through the ages from ancient Egypt. The Golden Dawn took this as fact. Unfortunate, because they had a very selective view of the history of magic. It was mainly a history of nonsense. And if you want to say that it's all made up anyway, so why should it matter? Fuck off. Magic's history is crazy. Looking at Egyptian, Greek, Samothracian, Anatolian, and much, 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 much more. Despite all they did, the Golden Dawn's impact on magic was more deleterious than was beneficial, to me at least. By buying into only certain parts of Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, they treated aspects of it, particularly the Kabbalah, as the overarching point and way magic works, not as it actually was, merely a part of magic, and a small one at that. They took a stone from Mount Agrippa and turned it into a planet. And somehow after the Golden Dawn dissolved, the rest of us got amnesia and forgot. We forgot the rest of the history. We forgot the story. And for many, the frustration of this becomes very real. Occult philosophy leads inevitably to the idea that this is all in your head. It's just something to think about. It's just simple Hermeticism. You want something to think about? Try evoking a spirit. Things change real fast when you get a glimpse of both sides of the two-way mirror. They certainly seemed to think they were doing the best with what they had. However, all these rites and the ceremonies, this high magic at the behest of the will, but they definitely created something very different. In 1996, Tom Church erected a statue at Wallace Monument, a tower that overlooks the town of Stirling in Scotland. It was a statue of Mel Gibson from the movie Braveheart with the word freedom written on it. This statue was the endpoint of the romanticism I opened this episode with. And that's what a lot of magic looks like now. We have an outrageous statue that nobody likes looking at. The Scottish were outraged, and the statue did come down. Our statue is still up there. I get why this fantasy is appealing. Who doesn't want initiation in a line of unbroken adepts from Egypt? Who doesn't want a system where everything is laid out, where you can visualize and contemplate yourself to your one true purpose, where the promise of you being as relevant as the universe you find yourself in? For nearly 7 years, I certainly did. It was part of my magical trajectory towards where I am now. And while I think that perhaps it was a waste, finding out what you don't want and what a certain kind of magic won't get you is never a waste. I certainly learned things. It helped in some respects. If the magic of the Golden Dawn is interesting to you, read Alan Moore's Promethea. It's pretty much all there and pictured beautifully. It's a persuasive argument that there is still some room for this kind of magic. If you actually want to interact with it besides reading a comic book, Techniques of High Magic, which Stephen Skinner begrudgingly admits that he should have called Techniques of Golden Dawn Magic, is probably the best because it actually wants you to do something, to use some of the more interesting parts of this kind of magic, romance removed. For myself, even while I was doing this magic, every day something felt off. You know, since last episode, I've changed my mind. It didn't feel like an amusement park ride that I wanted to get a refund for. I felt like I was in a gift shop, one specifically built for tourists. I knew that somewhere outside of this shop, the things that I could buy a miniature of, or the thing inside the snow globe, actually existed. And I was right. There were many rides not too far away, just outside of the gift shop, and I was happy that there were so many of them. Oh well. Wits for ya won't go by ya. Thanks for listening, everybody. Head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you can find a way to subscribe to my podcast. If they have podcasts, I'm going to be there for sure. Also on my website, you're going to be able to find links to my Twitter account, my Instagram account, and my Facebook account. Each episode of my podcast has a web page with a ton of show notes. I go out of my way for these show notes. There's going to be some incredible ones there. Please check that out. If you enjoy the show, leave a review on iTunes or anywhere else. Clicking the star is a little bit of fun, but if you want to write something about my podcast, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend. If you've got a friend that's a little bit weird like you, let them know about the show, because it might help. If you have any questions or you want to point out how wrong I am, please reach out to me. Again, I don't debate. Yes, no pigeon chess for me. I'll just leave it at that. But that's the show. Thank you all so much for going on this journey with me about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. We'll talk at you soon. Stay luminous. Haste you back. Thanks for listening, everybody. Love you all. Bye-bye.